Our next and last speaker will be Robert Nicholson. Robert is a research associate at the Paul E. Singer Foundation and is a recent Tikva Fellow and former Marine who researches law, religion, and the relationship between Christians and Jews. He holds a JD and MA in history from Syracuse University and a BA in Hebrew Studies from SUNY Binghamton, and has published articles in Mosaic Magazine, the Jerusalem Post, the Times of Israel, and other sources. He lives with his wife, Lindsay, and daughter in New York City. He will address the topic, why anti-Israel evangelicals have been successful and how they can be challenged. Robert, please.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Petra, for having me. I really appreciate the invite to be here and talk about this just very, very important topic. Just a 2-second thing about who I am. I work, as Alan said, I work for the Paul E. Singer Foundation, and the Paul Singer Foundation does lots of different things. What I do there is I'm kind of on the Christian desk, if you will, and my job is to figure out how to better organize, how to better strengthen, how to make more effective the evangelical Christian voice for Israel in the U.S. So this, Christ at the Checkpoint falls squarely within my mandate, and so that's why I'm here. I'm there at the conference. I'm trying to see firsthand what they're doing and trying to do the opposite of what they're doing to kind of counter this whole narrative. So I'm excited to be here. This topic is interesting to me, not just professionally, but also personally. I am an evangelical Christian. I don't know that I'm a millennial. I don't know where that line stops or ends, but I'm close. I'm familiar with these new trends that are going on within my own community. And, everything that's been said here is very true, and I want to talk more about that. But it's only because my personal stake in the game that I really got into this. And what happened, the first time I heard about all of this whole new narrative, it was 2010, and I should say I was raised in a very kind of pro-Israel environment. It was almost unquestioned. And so I was listening to this radio show. It was a very kind of popular radio host. His name's Hank Hanegraaff. And Hank Hanegraaff is a conservative evangelical thinker. He's not Tony Campolo. He's not some of these guys that were mentioned. This guy is very, very solid, as we would say. And I heard him. He had a commercial within some point in his radio show where he said, "You have to get this movie with God on our side. It's it'll really change your view of the Middle East and all this stuff." So anyway, I got the film. I was interested to hear what it was. And I was absolutely shocked by what I saw, because this was the first time that I had seen an evangelical presentation of the pro-Palestinian narrative. Up until that point, I had not seen it. And just watching it, I saw how effective this new narrative is for people my age and younger. So that kind of spurred me to action and kind of led to where I am today. I won't go into that. But so this debate is not abstract, I don't think. This is not some kind of theological, intra-Christian debate. It is that, and I will talk a lot about things from a Christian evangelical perspective. But this debate is unlike a lot of other theological issues in the church in that it actually affects people's lives here in the land. And I think that's really the most important reason why this whole topic needs to be talked about. So some of what I say, like I said, a lot of what I want to talk about today is how, why are they successful? How can we be successful? And truth be told, a lot of the way that we can be successful is reforming our own camp as Christian Zionists. And so a lot of what I say will be geared toward that end. Some people will find that interesting, some may not. But I think it's very, very important to talk about kind of reform within our own ranks in order to counter what the other side is doing. So first I want to talk about Christ at the Checkpoint. So I titled my thing, How Anti-Israel Evangelicals Are Successful and How counter them. But the beauty, from their perspective, the beauty of the Christ of the Checkpoint narrative is that they are not anti-Israel. They certainly would never ever say that they're anti-Israel. And when you come to their conferences, they're absolutely not Israel. They'll say, we are pro-Israel, as someone said, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace, pro-America, pro-everything. And so it would be much easier from our perspective if they were anti-Israel, but they're not. What they are is absolutely anti-Zionist, and they're absolutely against Israel as a Jewish state. This is a theme you'll hear time and again, that religious states, meaning the Jewish state, are absolutely unsatisfactory and cannot be allowed in this modern world that we live in. But nailing them down on that, this whole anti-Israel thing is very hard because they're very clever. The narrative they use is so effective that you almost have to admire them for what they're doing. And this anti-Israel aspect is something that is really worrisome, because you can't really say they're anti-Israel, because they will get up and say, there's no way I'm anti-Israel. I'm pro-Israel. I love Israelis. But once you dig a little deeper, which most people don't do, you find out that they are, in fact, anti-Israel as a Jewish state. So the one thing I will say, too, kind of a caveat, is that the Christ of the Checkpoint crowd, all the people that are there, and I've been there the past few days with Dexter and with Luke, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's not monolithic. So you get some really extreme people, and you get some kind of people that are not so extreme, and some people are actually the good guys, and then you have some people who kind of fall in the middle. So it's difficult to nail down for that reason as well, is that even within some of the Palestinian evangelical leaders themselves, you find kind of a spectrum of opinions on different things, and meaning that not all of them are quite as extreme as some of the others, which is, I don't know that I would call it encouraging, but it's something that we should definitely note. It's interesting to actually be there at this conference. I wish you could all be there and just hear what they are saying. I recently went to kind of a mini Christ at the Checkpoint in Philadelphia called Impact Holy Land, where some of the same characters were there. And, there's things I heard there, things I heard here that just, they absolutely defy explanation. They kind of blow my mind as somebody who's, studied the conflict and who knows what's going on. But, and I'll tell you some of the things that you hear. One of the most common things that you hear is this kind of retelling of Christianity, Jewish history. Jesus was a Palestinian under Roman occupation. He was resisting the occupation. The occupiers crucified him. And of course, all of that is applied to the modern situation of Palestinian Christians. Jewish history is Palestinian history. I was amazed yesterday. Somebody got up and said that the first Nakba was actually 587 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar came to and exiled the Jewish people. They didn't say the Jewish people. It was the Palestinian Nakba when the exile happened. It blows your mind. Then the first Intifada was actually the late 60s of the Common Era, when the Jews rebelled against the Romans. So that's the first Intifada. The second one was the Bar Kokhba revolt. And if you know the history, that sounds absolutely absurd, but so many people don't know that history. And they've completely expropriated the Jewish narrative and made it all, from Genesis to the end, it's all Palestinian. Abraham was a Palestinian. Jesus was a Palestinian. The Jewish people today aren't really the Jewish people of the Bible. They're Chazars. You hear that a lot. Jewishness, DNA has nothing to do with Jewishness. There's no Jewish people as such. It was some kind of construct, like Shlomo Sand's book. And that obviously denies the Jewish people any right at all to be here at all. These people are Eastern European Turks, or whatever the Chazars were. When I was in Philadelphia, I heard somebody say, one of these leaders, he's actually chairman of the Bethlehem Bible College, it is morally, theologically, and politically wrong to recognize the idea of a Jewish state. And that was kind of when the mask was torn off for me. and to see that morally, theologically, and politically, it's wrong. It's sinful to recognize a Jewish state. There's no equivalence between these two narratives. It's oppressors and oppressed. You can't even compare the two. And of course, in the end, really the enemy, even more in some ways in Israel, are evangelical Christians who support Israel. That is really the target. Me, I'm the target of this conference. And that is why it needs to be responded to. And well, that's what I'm trying to do. So, why are they successful? And I'm speaking now as somebody who's inside the evangelical community. I'm going to talk about things from a young evangelical perspective. And, putting myself in their shoes, why does this narrative speak to me? Why am I persuaded by what these people say? Because like I just explained, a lot of this is so absurd. I sit and wonder, how are people convinced by this? And I've really thought a lot about this, and I've listed a few things I think are important that we should talk about here. I think one thing is that this whole narrative, it's not very profound, but it's something new. Evangelicals, young ones they're so used to hearing their mom and dad talk about Israel. You got to support Israel. Israel, they're our people, they're our kin, their God is our God. So that when this narrative comes along, just by the very fact that it's new and unique and different, and it's kind of like Middle Eastern, there's this whole kind of mystique about it that I think a lot of young evangelicals, just right from the get-go, that they got the hook in their jaw. I think there's something to that. I mean, you see, even at this conference, you see young guys with the scruffy beards, the whole thing, wearing like keffiyehs around their neck, and they love it. It's like Lawrence of Arabia or something. So there's that. There's also the fact, and this you have to acknowledge, there are Palestinians who suffer living in the West Bank. This, if nobody was having any troubles in the West Bank or Gaza, then I think their narrative would die before it even starts. But the truth is, there are people who are having a tough time there, financially, whatever. So there's some kernel of truth in what they say by pointing to the suffering that they have some legitimacy in talking about this. I think one of the best things they do is constructing their narrative in such an experiential and emotional way, like Dexter mentioned. This is the new way to connect with young people generally, but and evangelicals are exactly the same. I mean, you tug on their heartstrings. The theology, look, put it all aside. Look at this poor Palestinian grandmother who's just every day has to scrounge for her living, and they bring these people on these immersive experiences. They're very good at that. The Telos group, which was mentioned, is bringing young evangelical Christians constantly, steady stream, partially funded by George Soros and some other people. They bring them on these trips. They take them to sad places, and they show them sad things. And these people, it's the Christian part of them, the human part of them, whatever you want to call it. They sympathize. It's an emotional attachment that is hard to fight with facts and theology, to be quite honest. And also in Christianity, there's something about defending the underdog, and maybe in Judaism as well, and that it's almost this automatic response that you have to stick up for the guy who's disenfranchised. I mean, it's like that's the salt of the earth. And I think portraying the Palestinians as the underdog is a perfect strategy, because that, as a Christian, you want to identify with the one who's not in power, who's suffering, who's hurting. Like I said before, they're not overtly anti-Israel. They're so clever in the way that they construct this. They're pro-everything. They love everybody. They're universalist. Everything's good. Everything's happy. They're pro-American, pro-Israeli. They want the Jews in Israel to be safe and secure and having just a wonderful time. But they want the same thing for the Palestinians. And that, when you're pro-everybody and you love everybody, evangelicals love that. Evangelicals are just so about love and being nice. I mean, it's just kind of part of the culture. And the young people even more so. They want to live it out in a way that their parents maybe didn't even live out. They want to really be radical in their faith. And this whole idea of being loving to everybody is just, it's got them really strong. And of course they go to these places, and these people are nice, they're hospitable, they invite them into their homes, they put them up with families, and there's this connection that happens that's very, very strong. And just the whole narrative of social justice, they're just eating it up. I mean, as a young evangelical, who doesn't know anything about the conflict, you show up here, never been here before, they take you on these tours, it is almost automatic that you identify with this narrative. The language of being peacemakers, again, very Christian. They're not afraid of being nuanced in their theology. They're very strong, as I think Dexter mentioned, talking about Jesus, who is the center of Christianity, obviously. And they say, look, I don't care what your theology is, if it doesn't comport with love your neighbor as yourself, then you got bad theology. And that sounds right for some people. They have clever spokespeople. Some of these people at the conference, they're great. You go out, have coffee with them. They're very nice people. They're not these crazy militant people that you might think. They're not jihadists. They're just genuinely nice people. And that is disarming. You meet them and you're just like, wow, this is a nice guy. And when they speak, they have this whole narrative down to a science that it's coming from a nice person, this nice narrative is talking about love and social justice. It really hits to the heart of what a young evangelical wants to be, wants to do, and I think that really is the key to their success. I think also, again, talking about my own side, the Christian Zionist side, I think we have a lot of problems, and I'll talk about a couple of them if I have, hopefully I have time here, but we have a lot of easy targets, people who are easy to attack, people who seem the opposite of these nice, wonderful people here in Palestine. And I think a lot of it too is just that evangelicals are largely ignorant and kind of apathetic about what's going on, and they really don't know, they don't investigate, and they kind of, like somebody said, take the first narrative that comes to them, and they're almost inoculated from whatever comes afterward. And that apathy, honestly, across the board in the church, that apathy of evangelicals is really one of the key problems, I think, in the community, and it has a real effect here. Unless they make these guys sound like angels, they're so nice and wonderful, they lie a lot. That's another strength that they have, and they're not afraid to do it. And Dexter mentioned a few examples, and they really don't mind just telling a bald-faced lie. And if you don't, who of these young evangelicals know about the wall and where its geography is? None of them know. And nobody corrects them, nobody retracts it, and it just hangs out there in the air, and that's the new fact. So that, I think those are some of the things that really make this narrative effective. And I think really, when it comes to challenging them, I think the real, honestly, and I'm speaking as somebody who's inside my own community, a lot of it comes with fixing ourselves. There's this old Christian saying about, take the board out of your own eye before you remove the speck from your brother's eye. And I think when it comes to this issue, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and that we make ourselves easy targets. We don't really do the homework. We're not strong in what we really think. We don't clarify our goals. And I think that is just asking to be toppled by this new narrative. So I think a lot of it is purifying our ranks, strengthening what we believe, and coming up with a strategy to counter these people in a way that really, I don't know that really anybody's doing on a very large scale. You need to reinvent, to kind of recast the Christian Zionist thinking. It's such a simplistic narrative at times. It drives me crazy. You kind of base it on one verse in Genesis that God says, bless the Jewish people. And that's part of it, but it's so shallow that the slightest breeze just blows that over. You say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean you support everything that Israel does? And would Jesus do that? And you got him. That's it. And I think that there's some kind of reinvention of my community, the Christian Zionist community, that needs to take place to target, to persuade these young millennials about the truth of our side of the narrative. I think a lot of problem comes with this kind of knee-jerk reaction from acknowledging that the Palestinians do suffer. That's a problem, because you automatically open yourself up to charges from the other side that you just don't love people. You don't care about injustice. And I think it's possible as a Christian Zionist to say, look, Palestinians suffer. I just don't make that kind of causal jump to say that all of that suffering has to do with Israel. I think it's possible to do that, and when you do that, you strengthen your narrative immensely. This whole thing of Palestinians don't suffer, there's no such thing as a Palestinian. There may be some truth to some of that stuff, but it doesn't help you when you're trying to reach an audience, especially this young millennial audience. I think a lot of the strength of this other narrative, like I mentioned, is bringing people on these immersive trips. Not the Holy Land trip, not the Galilee and all that, but bringing them into homes, showing them real people, letting them connect with the modern land, not the ancient biblical land that lives in their head. I think that also has tremendous strength, and I don't think anybody's really doing it on a large enough scale and doing it with an itinerary that really packs power for the young evangelical community. And that, of course, requires funding, and there's a lot of questions about what you would do exactly, but I think that kind of immersive, emotional, experiential component is a necessary part of the strategy that it has to happen if we're going to go forward and be stronger. I think there's also the strength of their side is they have Christians living here. When people come, you're an evangelical Christian, you come, you meet an evangelical Palestinian, there's a bond. I think the Christian Zionist community isn't doing enough to reach or to talk with Christians who live in the land, whether they're Israelis or Palestinians. That's key, because you kind of have this, this kind of forward guard that you can rely on for information, for kind of understanding of what's going on in the ground. And that's something that I think is desperately lacking and needs to happen. And this whole thing about, there's something in the Christian Zionist narrative that tends to be, not always for sure, but tends to be kind of anti-Palestinian, anti-peace. There's this thing like, look, peace is just never going to work. And look, it's the facts often justify that view, but painting yourself that way, we're talking about messaging now. A lot of this is about messaging and about tone. Painting yourself that way is just, it's like shooting yourself in the foot, because you automatically, as a Christian, look bad. You're anti-peace. You're anti-caring for people who are suffering. And I think that there's that needs to change as well. While you remain clear-headed about Israel's security needs, but at the same time you say, look, it's possible in the future. Sure, maybe this is going to work out. Maybe. And just doing that alone, I think, would make your narrative that much stronger. Also, just the tone of Christian Zionist rhetoric, being nice, being sympathetic, being, loving. I mean, I'm not talking about being squishy to the point of you don't stand for anything, but I'm talking about just being more, call it Christ-like, I guess you could say, in the way that you speak, because this is one of, we hear these characterizations of Christian Zionists at this conference, and that's always crazy, militant, mean-spirited, anti-peace, end times nuts who support Israel. And that's really not true, but sometimes there's people among our group that seem to validate that assessment, and that needs to change as well. Also, I think it's important to connect in some way with the people who lead the Christ of the Checkpoint movement and to confront them face to face. That's a Christian principle. You don't talk about someone behind their back. You go to them and you say, what's your problem? Or, I have a problem with you. And for too long, I think Christian Zionists have just kind of ignored these people or said, you guys are wrong. I don't want anything to do with you. And in the meantime, you have the other side who invites my side to their conference to speak. And who comes out the winner in terms of the millennials who are watching? These guys will say, look, all of you people out there that disagree with me, I love you. I love you. You're my brothers and sisters. And you guys, I'm just so happy that you're here. And meanwhile, my side is boycotting the event. And that is just, again, in terms of messaging, it's a real problem. I'm not saying you have to be best friends with these people, but you have to at least maintain this kind of appearance of dialogue. Hopefully it could lead somewhere, but even if it didn't, I think it's important. I think just the refinement of Christian Zionist principles and theology, I think it's just so fuzzy at times, and people just are not educated on why evangelical Christians support Israel. I think that's a real problem, and I think it's something that needs to be kind of staked out a position. And people have done this, but I don't think it's filtered down to the kind of mainstream evangelical community. So that, like I said, it's so shallow that it's so easily overturned. And that kind of just education and the refinement is really, really important. And I know I'm speaking kind of Christian stuff about the Christian community, but it's really key. And I think if we're going to be successful, it's part of it. And I only have a few more points here. But bring Jesus into the picture as part of that theology. Bring in the sympathy. Bring in all of these things, important. Also educate on the history of the conflict. I can't tell you, I don't even guess the percentage of evangelicals who, if you said Ben Gurion, or if you said Sabra and Shatila, or any of these terms, 99% wouldn't even know who they were. Theodore Herzl, no idea. And there needs to be some kind of basic understanding about what is the history of the Jewish state and the Jewish people, really, broadening it to the Jewish people. So that, these guys, the Trice of the Checkpoint, they start in 1948 as if it just happened out of nowhere. Like these European colonialists came from nowhere, they set up the shop, and they pushed us all out. And in 1967, they took even more from us, and now we are where we are today. Where the Jewish history, the narrative, goes so much further than that. There's so much substance to it, especially as a Christian. The Hebrew roots of Christianity, there's so much to be said to ground an evangelical in that history, and it's something that so many, especially young evangelicals, have no idea about. And so just kind of basic education, because you have, I think it's Proverbs 19:2. Something, it says, like, zeal without knowledge is no good. You will, it leads to destruction. I think there's so much zeal in the Christian Zionist community and so little knowledge that you're just asking to be to hit a brick wall at some point. I think, and once all these things happen, we're much better equipped to start calling out the errors on the other side. And there's many errors. And I'm not trying to say that the Christian Zionist community is all at fault for all of this. I think it's partially at fault. And I think if we want to respond, then we need to get better and stronger in what we believe and what we want to do, so that we can effectively, and that's the key word, effectively counter this other narrative. Because until we do, we have no ammunition. We have the weapon, we believe in it, we believe in Israel, but we have no ammunition to fight that war. And that's, you're not going to win, and they have so much ammunition, and listening to them, as I said before, it's just so clever and so well done that until we get ready and we gear up for battle, we are going to lose the fight. We need to find better spokespeople. We need to be more sophisticated. We need to be more nuanced. We need to be more strategic, and that's the key goal. And there's a lot of things that we can do. We need to saturate the evangelical media space like they do, with the films, with YouTube clips. There's a lot of just functional things that we can do. Writing. There's such a lack of clever, sophisticated writing from a Christian Zionist perspective. It's kind of all shallow and just very kind of basic, and young, sophisticated audience doesn't see anything there that's worthwhile. Full of exclamation points, and it's just like it looks crazy to them. So I think there's a lot of things that need to be done in media. I think there's a lot of things that need to be done in strategy, trips. I think education, training the next generation, not just in their theology, but in their advocacy, how to practically advocate. And I think in that way, I think that this battle is not a lost battle. I would never say that it is. I don't think that, I would never go so far as to say it's the end of evangelical support for Israel. We're not there yet. And it's winnable. It's something that needs to be thought about very clearly. And something that needs to be, money needs to be put to it, legs need to be put to it, and I think that in that way, it is winnable, and I definitely think it's winnable. And to the Jewish members of the audience, I'm sure there's quite a few, I think I would say that, I work in a lot of Jewish circles, so I'm very aware of all of the concerns, and I get the same questions over and over again. And I think the only thing I would say, really, there's a lot of things that you cannot do to make this battle winnable, because you're kind of outside the battle. But I think that there's a few things that you can do to kind of augment the strength of the Christian Zionist side. And I think the first thing is to accept evangelical support for Israel. Just accept it, be happy. And maybe I'm preaching to the choir here today. But accept it, respect it, try your best to understand it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to believe in Jesus. But there's something that needs to happen, I think, so that kind of that connection that Christians have when they come and meet Palestinians here, that needs to happen when Christians come and meet Jewish Israelis. There needs to be some kind of connection, some kind of mutual respect. That I think that, I mean, Christian Zionism doesn't need to be reciprocated. It's going to happen either way, but I think it can be strengthened by kind of feedback or support from the Jewish community, and there is some for sure, definitely. But I think more would be even better. And you know, just to kind of to close, I think the best way to fight Christ at the checkpoint is not always to attack Christ at the checkpoint and the people who do that. There's a place for that. That's important. You have to call out what they're doing is wrong, a lot of the lies and all that. I think, but the first place that we should go is to ourselves and to fixing ourselves. I speak again as an evangelical, fixing our community, streamlining what it is we want to do, being strategic, and then we can be properly ready to respond to this other narrative. And I think until that happens, until we just kind of just say they're wrong, we're right, we're going to keep doing the thing that we're doing, whatever that is, I don't think that we're going to have any strategic gains. And so kind of the judgment starts with us. That's my kind of bottom line. And I think that there's a lot that needs to happen. And the good thing is, I mean, this is something I do. This is my job all day long. So I mean, the fact that people are cooperating with me, the people that hired me, there's definitely hope. But we're always looking to do more, and we're looking for more partners and people who are very interested to see this conflict be turned the other way. And so I think it's winnable, and those are the things I think that we need to do to win. And again, I thank you all for coming, and even especially on this rainy day, and hearing about this seemingly obscure issue. And I take it as a sign of goodwill, and I'm very encouraged by it. And again, I just thank you for inviting me and for listening as well.